Hi, everybody. Welcome to the whatever this is, All L's show. And thanks for joining me, panel. One last time? Second last time? One of the late times. Allison, where are we? Heading into the last week. What's going on?
We're
What are we
heading in
looking
to get
for?
out the vote this week.
Yeah?
So everybody's got all of our war rooms are going to be dissolving, and people are going to be going to the battleground ridings, which I would think are Edmonton, Calgary, Greater Toronto, Greater Vancouver. So the platforms were dropped over the Easter weekend, which I think was a little bit pathetic. I don't know about you guys, but I didn't really love looking at platforms while trying to hang out with my parents and my children. But those are out. I don't think they're changing a lot of minds. Voter turnout has been pretty high. So we'll see if that turnout is the result of people galvanized to vote in the national interest, or whether that conservative base is as strong as Mr. Polyev has said it is. I think the only things that change the show at this point are events. If we see Donald Trump dipping his head in the last week, strategic voting is always a big thing. So you'll see the NDP going out and reminding people in battleground ridings that it's in many ridings across Canada, it's the Democrats who defeat the Conservatives. And from there on, I think it's just a GOTV game. So typically the NDP and the Conservatives are strongest. I think that both those parties will need to do a lot of work in BC right now, and Singh and Blanchette will both need to remind voters that they do have options.
It has always seemed to me, Allison, that the NDP has the most ability to reassign people from the entire national movement to whatever the battle of the moment is. Like, so, our friend Sally Hauser from Newfoundland would suddenly be working in an Alberta campaign or a BC campaign or a Manitoba campaign. She finally got elected in Saskatchewan. I assume there's a lot of that going on now too.
No doubt, that is an NDP calling card, is that they have incredibly strong local campaign fortresses, and to witness it is something else. But yeah, we fan out all over the country, and it's where you will learn the most about politics too.
Yeah, and take out food, I assume.
Indeed,
Marci,
everyone wants the strong Nona riding where there's like good Nona cooking.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
the things I
savory, the
learned.
best. Yeah.
Uh, Marci, is this thing baked in? I mean, I was thinking through my little history trove of elections that still moved in the last week, and I thought of Paul Martin pulling victory from the jaws of defeat in 2004 one last time. I thought of the Orange Wave, which was very much a post-debate phenomenon in 2011. But it seems to me um, those are continuations of pre-existing trends. If it's been steady for a while, like it has been in this race, it's really hard for anyone to move the needle in the final week.
It is hard to move the needle entirely in the final week. That being said, we have seen and we've discussed on this program since really the first week of this election that the polls have been highly volatile until they solidified, but that volatility is not old, it's still fresh. And so I would say there is still the opportunity for movement. I certainly don't think this is necessarily 100% yet in the can. I do think the Liberal campaign is treating it very delicately. Yes, they've been forerunners for the last number of weeks, but they understand that volatility too. And volatility means that some of those voters who have been coalescing or suggesting they are going to coalesce around the Liberal vote still could go home. They could go home to Allison's friends in the NDP. They could go home to the Bloc. Mr. Blanchette was very persuasive as he always is during the debates. And so I don't think anyone is taking this yet for granted on the Liberal side. Certainly, I am not, and the examples that you provide, Paul, are good cautionary tales for why you have to continue to be incredibly focused and not assume that you've got this thing. To the points Allison were making, which were excellent points for people to understand the real shift that has happened over the course of this weekend. We moved from the air war into the ground war, and the platforms were really the last big milestone of that so-called air war, where it's really the war room in control in terms of message and narrative and content. If you're somebody like me who's lived in the war rooms and worked on the policy team and the platforms, up until platform release day, you are one of the most important people in the war room. Like you're getting time with the leader every day to brief. Everybody's looking to you. You're at the center of life. And then just like that, it's like an instant oblivion for policy folks as people are redeployed almost instantly overnight to the mobilization campaign, to different local campaigns, to the regions, et cetera. So this is a real, like, palpable shift in the campaign, and we are going to see which machine is operating the most effectively right now to bring home that vote.
Liberals and the New Democrats brought out their platform on Easter weekend. Is that something you do when you want people to read your platform?
No.
Like it's,
I'll say it quickly, and then Jason probably will want to weigh in on it because I think the conservatives that maybe they've waited for an opportunity to get more eyeballs on it after Easter weekend. I'm not sure about the timing, but in terms of putting it out over Easter weekend, obviously it means that the platforms, for the most part, were one secondary considerations for that fully costed piece. To most of the big marquee planks really have been rolled out already. So from a war room or from a campaign's perspective, the platform is really just the table stakes that they have to put out, but they feel they've already communicated their main policy conviction at this point.
Jason, Mark Carney brought out his platform this weekend. Pierre Poilievre didn't. Which one is smarter?
It's hard to know. Neither of those moves is probably going to swing the election one way or another. Paul is my view of this, and I just want to pick up on something that Marci just said. Platform release day, just for everyone out there, is one of the most terrifying days for any campaign because like everyone's trying to figure out whether or not their numbers add up behind the scenes. Like behind the scenes, those platforms look published and polished and ready to roll, and they look like they're all bolted down. The truth is, like 5 minutes before, somebody was having a crisis of confidence over whether or not these numbers added up. And you saw yesterday, it happens to everybody. Like the Liberal campaign has to pull their platform down for a couple of minutes and check a couple of things and put it back up. So those days, I will say they're great for journalists. The journalists are, obsessed over when are you dropping your platform and when your costed platform. I will say most Canadians aren't waiting with bated breath on whether this, and this hasn't been a platform election, by the way. I'm actually a little surprised that Mr. Carney dropped a platform at all. There was some debate over at the beginning of his campaign amongst Liberals about whether or not he would just sort of essentially run against Trump and not really do much on the policy side. Now they've done a little bit on the policy side. I think they couldn't sort of help themselves, but here we are. So it's hard to know which of those moves is smarter, Paul. But I'll just say that Polyev has been especially policy heavy over the course of the campaign as well. That's one difference between him and some of the past conservatives over the last little bit too. Not nationally, maybe, but there's been essentially policy every day from Polyev, and I've heard a lot of that from people as well. So we're going to see whether or not this is a policy election. I actually don't think it's a policy election. I think it's a leadership election. I think the policy is just what's in the background for people to just discuss. But I think this is which of these two guys do you want in charge? And the policy is mostly just the background music.
Allison, I mean, let me make a claim and then you can tell me whether I'm full of shit. To the extent that Mark Carney's selling proposition is that he is the change that Canadians want, that he is sure not Justin Trudeau. It felt to me on Saturday like that platform with that cover and that language was a bad way to advance that claim because it felt awfully liberal. It felt, and they're out there with pie charts showing that they've got much more capital spending and much less operating spending, but it sure felt like the fourth Justin Trudeau liberal platform. Am I blowing smoke or?
No, I don't think you're blowing smoke. It did feel like the fourth Justin Trudeau platform, and I think it was right down to the branding and the messaging. It looked pretty similar to previous platforms. I think it sort of speaks to who Carney is, that he felt the need to put out a platform. but they put it out in probably the most low risk way possible by dumping it out on Easter weekend. And, you know, every party, I guess, other than the Greens is guilty of that. I just don't know. Why bother? Honestly, it wasn't for Canadians. It wasn't for votes.
Marci.
If I may, so look, I mean, platforms serve a certain function during the course of the election campaign in that they are instructive to voters about what the mandate is that they are electing, whether or not people read them in detail or go through. Jason, you were giving me some PTSI flashbacks in terms of costing tables, but whether or not Canadians actually go through the line by line and dissect the costing, I think is probably fair to say that's not the case. There is a credibility factor, which is why it's table stakes in terms of why the major parties need to put something out. But do consider that the platforms are actually the basis of the mandate letters of the next government, of the instructions from the prime minister to the ministry. And so they are as much a signal to the system of what the incoming government's intent is to govern as they are communications documents in the confines of a campaign. So they do serve another role that we don't really see, that's a little more behind the curtains, but that does matter a lot to stakeholders, to Canadians, to public servants who have to carry out and implement that mandate. So there is a reason why the Liberals would put one out no matter what, with a costing affixed to it, run by the parliamentary budget officer, to ensure that it can hold that it holds water.
So my strong feeling is that if the Liberals form the next government, for the sake of good governance in this country, it's really important to jam a fork into that whole process. Pulp the platform, send out mandate letters to the ministers to say, you tell me how we need to improve life in your portfolio. And you know, I mean, I'm kind of eager to get off of this hamster wheel that we've been on for a decade. I don't know.
But what about the
I'm sorry,
lobbyists?
you.
The lobbyists need
But
something.
what about
Yes.
the lobbyists? I won't argue with you, but look, but the platform letters actually can be iterative processes. The platform informs the mandate letters, and then usually that first meeting between the prime minister and the incoming minister is to discuss what's in the mandate letters and to seek some feedback from the minister. So it is not it is not all set in stone before the minister has a chance to weigh in. There is an opportunity for that too. But I'm not going to argue with you. And the platform felt very liberal red book. It absolutely had all the hallmarks of a traditional liberal red book, even if it was quite a bit slimmer than what we've seen in the last few go rounds.
Paul,
Jason.
you're a man. You're a man who's never managed a caucus or a new minister who's doesn't have a clue what they're doing, and it's their first day in Ottawa. Gets there and tells you, you know, I'm laughing because I think we've all been there in one way or another, where you're like, you know, you get these green people who come in and you know they've got no experience or little experience, certainly in the portfolio. They know very little about the portfolio that they're in. And anyway, I'm joking, but I will say you're probably right. That maybe somewhere in the middle is a little better of joint priorities. But I will say this: I was a little shocked with the positioning of Carney's portfolio. By the way, Paul, like his policy document. Like I will say, he's been presenting himself as essentially an economist and a fiscal conservative, for lack of a better term, with a heart, I would say, is how he's presenting himself out there. And that document, you know, they had to have known, and obviously this is a strategy for your listeners out there, is meant to solidify the left. That document is meant to make sure that nobody who's currently thinking about voting for them bleeds back to the NDP. And so that's a very interesting choice for Mark Carney, right? Like Mark Carney, that's not Mark Carney. That's actually not who Mark Carney says he is. So to get him after, you know, a couple of months in politics, to sit him down and say, hey, sir, we've got to actually present a document that is like at least as leftward leaning as Justin Trudeau. And to have him nod and say yes, I'm sure that behind the scenes, there's going to be some stories come out about how sort of that process went, because I will say that that's not who Mark Carney says he is. And I will say too, putting a first-time campaigner, Mark Carney, who's had his wobbles, but he's gotten better over the course of the campaign, or at least certainly during the debate, have to sell for the last sort of 7, 8, 10 days of the campaign, essentially a leftward leading plan, when he, I think, is somewhat of a fiscal conservative, or at least pretends he is. That's a really weird choice, or it's an interesting choice for me because authenticity really matters. And if he's sort of questioned day after day after day, how come you're spending so much? You're spending more than Trudeau, all of that kind of stuff. I'm not sure that it's the easiest position to put a new prime minister and a new campaigner in because it's difficult to sell a message you actually don't believe in.
Yeah. I mean, so in his shoes, what I would say is my friend Stephen Harper and I ran gigantic deficits in 2009 when we were saving the country.
For
And now
sure.
we're going to do it again.
For
Yes.
sure.
We
But it's
used to
not what
be,
he said up until Saturday, right? That's the
yeah.
weird part. Is it's not what he believes in either.
The other thing that's happened since last week is a couple of debates and some other stuff in Montreal. Uh, Allison, what's the story out of the debates? I mean, does anyone in Canada even remember there were debates on this Monday morning? Or did they change anything?
I think everybody showed up and did what they had to do, but I don't think it changed anything.
Um, could it have? I mean, is the only way for debates to make a difference anymore is if somebody really messes up?
I think if somebody really messes up, or somebody's just much more fiery than you expected them to be, or just really found a moment and pounced on it and caught someone else off guard. I mean, I think Brian Mulroney was good at that. Leighton was good at that. I don't see anybody right now good at that. I think Polyev could be, but I think that he has had to kind of give himself a personality makeover that kind of boxes him in a little bit. I kind of feel for the guy because his frustration is a frustration that I feel too. I'm tired of the status quo as well. I think change is needed. I just think that he played to his base for far too long, and he played the same role for far too long, and it's hard to break out of that. So, as I said, I think everybody showed up and said what they needed to say, but I didn't see anyone come out as a clear front runner.
Marci, I just thought, especially the English debate, which was a little sort of cleaner and people had, first of all, more room to say what they wanted to say, and secondly, more ability to say what they wanted to say. I just thought that one in particular was a fantastic debate. But does it leave any residue in the popular consciousness?
I agree with your assessment. I thought it was a very strong debate in terms of getting a real feel for who these gentlemen are and what their intent is with respect to government. Does it leave a residue? No, I think in this case, I agree with Allison pretty much completely. I don't think it's moved the dial. I think what it allowed for were the two front runners who are, to Jason's earlier point, the leaders that people are really kicking the tires on. It truly allowed the opportunity to ensure that they have the jelly, that either of them have the stuff. If you were thinking about voting conservative and you wanted some guarantee that Polyev could actually show up and be prime minister, you got that. If you wanted to see that Mr. Carney could remain cool and composed under fire and not dissolve into a prickly mess or anything that was forecast, then you got that. You saw them both. You saw them both as very able, capable. Either of them could represent Canada on the international stage. I think in terms of this debate, whatever residue there is, that's all there is that we have two leaders presenting themselves with different, really, in actually a lot of ways, different perspectives on how to move the country forward, which one feels like the better fit for you. So to that extent, Paul, I do think it was a useful exercise. I think it was important for Canadians to have that opportunity to help cement their decision.
Jason, if we had seen that Pierre Poilievre 10 more times in the last 2 years, would he be in a better shape today?
I've seen that Pierre Poilievre more than 10 times in the last 2 years, and it's a good question. I think the answer is mostly yes, Paul. And it's interesting, I mean, Carney and Poilievre are both first-time people. We forget about that, right? Like Carney's been prime minister for 10 or 15 minutes. Poilievre was in his first national debates. Never really tested like that up until now. And I've seen how nervous, whether it's I've presented, I've got premiers and prime ministers and leaders of, I've seen how nervous people can be. And, Canadians don't actually maybe empathize with that, but I can tell you that both of those guys was, shitting bricks before that debate. I promise you that. Carney, am I really going to blow a lead? I might do something tonight that does this. And Polyev, which is like, I have to do well tonight, otherwise we probably don't have a shot. And I thought it was interesting to watch both of them. I thought, to your point, every new leader finds their footing at a different time of the campaign. You hope that it's earlier on. You hope it's before the campaign. You hope it's 5 years before the campaign, right, Paul? I will say I thought Polyev, and just in the tweaks that he made to his presentation over the last week or two, and I think it's right to say it's a little softer, but I think that it was also he didn't pull his punches either. And I thought particularly the second sort of half of that debate, as the debate wore on, I thought he got quite a bit stronger and really found his footing. Like all of a sudden you saw the comfort level of, this is how I go at Carney without looking, like I'm lambasting him or scaring people, quite frankly. And so I thought that was really good. And I did think as well that it was anyway. Kudos to Steve Paikin. Kudos to Mr. Waugh in French. I thought the debate moderation was terrific on both sides. And yeah, I mean, Mr. Polyev. The question is the one thing the last thing I wanted to say is I think Marci and Allison were right. The one good thing for Polyev was going into that debate, he's seen it as like not as strong a leader amongst, to the phantom and the CV and all those things that are Carney. And I actually think that it leveled the playing field. That's one thing that I think what people will take for the debates is like, either of these guys could probably be prime minister. And I think that's mostly a great news for Mr. Polyev as people make their decisions over the next 10 days, because up until then, he was competing against the specter of Mr. Carney's resume. And I think when you saw both of them on the level, it was like, okay, this is a lot. These two guys are a lot closer than I thought. And maybe I even like Polyev better, even if I was thinking about voting for Carney. So I think that's the impact of the feeling of watching the debate.
I'm glad somebody mentioned Paikin to tee me up for just to say it was really great to see him moderate a debate again. I did one of those things 10 years ago, and my model even at that time was Steve Paikin. And so seeing him come out and put on the suit again was like that James Bond movie that Sean Connery made in 1983. It was like good to see he still got the moves. So on that note, we will call it quits for this week. Sprint to the finish. We'll talk again after it's done about how it all went. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.